Good evening. I would like to call to order tonight's public session, an open meeting for the Tewksbury Public School Committees at 4:31 p.m. Tonight we have a very short agenda. We are started here with Mr. Russo, Ms. Biagioni-Smith, and myself. We are expecting our other members to join us, but in reflection of your time, Mr. Libby, I'd say if you want to get started, feel free.
Thank you very much. If that pleases the committee, we'll start rolling. Welcome. This is our first budget presentation. We try to do a few of these during the springtime and during the formulation of our budget, which gets presented at town meeting in May. The budget decisions we make in the district are reflective of our district strategy and our district goals, first and foremost. District strategy at this time was formulated with the administration and the school committee over the past few years and developed in this last summer. The Tewksbury Public Schools community believes that our education program will reflect our collective vision of a learner. Our consistent observable growth among our students and staff will be evident in the achievement of academic, social, and emotional success in school and far beyond. And the theory of action to help us get there. When the Tewksbury Public Schools prioritizes a vision of a learner that focuses on creative problem solving, collaboration, and effective communication, then all students will experience innovative, inclusive, equitable, and student-centered instruction, prioritizing academic, social, and emotional positive outcomes. So we try to focus on that when making budgetary decisions in this process. So when we talk about the school department budget, consists of 4 major parts, 3 of which are managed by the schools, and 1 is managed and shared with the town. The 3 manage the personnel. That's the biggest portion of our budget by far. The operating accounts represent things like transportation, tuition, contracted services, utilities, other items we need to run our buildings and schools. And capital outlay is reserved for longer-term investments in our buildings or infrastructure. And the items managed or shared with the town are fixed costs, things like health insurance, retirement, unemployment, other types of insurance for our buildings and automobiles. Those are fixed costs that we share with the town. We have a little bit less control over those type of things. So when we talk about the school budget, we'll generally focus on the salary, operating, and capital outlay sections of our budget. So the school budget process is a fluid one. Things are constantly changing within the district, and what we present shows where we are at that moment in time. So our needs are changing, our resources are changing. About a dozen things have changed in the 2 weeks since I presented figures to the town manager 2 weeks ago. So we expected that this will happen from now until May, and our budget will constantly change to reflect those needs between now and final approval. So the school department budget is part of the overall town budget. It's reviewed and recommended by our committee, recommended to the town manager and the finance committee for approval. The finance committee then recommends for approval to the citizens at town meeting. And the final actual approval of funds happens at town meeting in May, and that rests with the citizens of Tewksbury who attend that town meeting. So where does school funding come from? This question comes up quite a bit. we get our flat budget from last year plus 60% of any projected new revenues for next year. So there's revenues coming in from the state, local revenues, property taxes, anything that's new, the school gets 60% of that new revenue. Now, why do we get 60%? This next slide shows the breakdown of expenditures between the town and the school is roughly 60-40. You see in the last, in FY24, it was 59.92%. FY25 is projected to 60.73%. It generally hovers right around that 60% mark is our expenses. So that's been the way that the town manager has allocated the funding to follow those expenses in a 60-40 fashion. So the challenges facing us in formulating the FY25 budget, first and foremost, collective bargaining agreements are not in place right now for any of our bargaining units. That's really the main challenge that we're facing to producing a budget. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to click on that. But as those numbers become apparent, and we get figures from how they settle those contracts, we'll take appropriate steps to make the budget match where we need to be. Typically, we use prior year's actuals to determine the needs and/or budget opportunities. We only have 6 months of FY23 data with the new center school building structure. So it's a little difficult to predict what a full year will look like, but we're doing our best with that. And schools are still feeling the effects of COVID-19 with students recovering from learning loss, social emotional needs. We're still seeing effects of that time out of school, and we want to be able to have resources to appropriately deal with those needs. The use of ESSER grants ends in September 2024. Also, that was the last of the COVID money. We want to balance the use of that ESSER funding by make sure we use it all up by the deadline, and be able to support needs that were funded with ESSER funds if they're appropriate to stay within our school budget. We're also doing some preschool restructuring, balancing between the Heathbrook and the Dewing School, moving classes between those two buildings. We want to make sure that students are able to attend their local school for the appropriate program if it's available. So areas of focus, personnel, as I said, collective bargaining was first and foremost. We're working on developing multiple contingencies depending on how those contracts settle. Assessing personnel opportunities based on our currently declining enrollment at many of our schools. We're assessing those grant-funded positions to begin to fund via the LEA budget if appropriate. And increasing the balancing of special ed programming between those, the Heathbrook and the Dewing, those PK to 1 schools. Operationally, we're always searching for opportunities to save money, consolidate, or restructure in transportation, utilities, technology, supplies, and maintenance, and trying to keep ahead of rising inflationary trends in those areas. Our focus in technology, communications, improving and consolidating systems. We're seeing a lot of new products come out that can do more than one type of communication with families, can handle a lot of different ways to get messages out, so we're looking into those. We're going to continue our smartboard to ClearTouch conversion district-wide. We still have some of the older technology in some of our classrooms. We want to convert those to the new upgraded ClearTouch devices district-wide. We do have, we're entering next year is the 5th year of our E-rate 5-year window to take advantage of some E-rate discounts on wiring or infrastructure projects. These projects have to be designed to improve student connectivity. We're in pretty good shape right now across the district. We did an upgrade 5 years ago through this program, system-wide, where we upgraded all the wireless access points across the district. And we're thought maybe in 5 years, when we did that 5 years ago, that by now there would be some new technology that we might want to take advantage of in our classrooms. But as of right now, we're in pretty good shape and struggling for a way to take advantage of those discounts. But our tech folks are still working on that. And we're always looking at our printing and copying solutions. Our copy contract is expiring this year. Our major contract across the district, 28 machines. So we're working with a consultant on revamping that, the way we provide copying services across the district. And then building improvements, we're looking at the needs of the Heathbrook and Dewing. Those buildings are going to be around for at least another 6 to 10 years. Could be longer than that, depending on how things go. But we want to make sure that they're acceptable places for student learning. And building and ground systems just across the board, HVAC, electric, plumbing, security, intercom, PA, and phone. Some of our systems in this school, while it feels new, we're being told are no longer supported by a lot of our vendors, our HVAC system, lighting controls. So we're going to have to look at some possible replacements in those areas. So the overall increase that we're looking at presently for the district, that dollar change, if you will, in that second to last column, $1.397 million. So that represents 60% of the new growth projected at this time for the town. We've projected right now for 1.1 of that going into salaries and 243,000 into operating. When you expand our budget to include the fixed costs, it's a 3.17% increase. We were predicting a sizable increase in our health insurance costs across the district. It has to do with the number of members we have, retirees and active employees, and also a rate increase from our provider. So some key assumptions and changes that are reflected in this current version of the FY25 budget. In the salary area, same workforce as FY24 with the following exceptions. The 6 principal support positions that were grant funded are eliminated in this version of the budget. We shifted the salaries of 3 adjustment counselors, 1 nurse, and 1 English as a second language teacher that were in the grant into our budget. So they're reflected in these numbers, those positions. And again, keeping with our goals and district message. We want to be able to support social, emotional, and our most needy students. So those have been shifted into our budget. Straight 3% cost of living for all bargaining units, 3.5% for the TTA steps 1 through 4, in line with the most recent proposal on the table from the school committee. Also, any known retirees that we know about presently for at the end of this year will be absorbed, reorganized. Those positions, will be absorbed, reorganized, or filled by current staff in this budget plan. On the operating side, we were level funded, which is tantamount to taking a decrease based on inflation, but we're going to try to make that work as best we can, with the following exceptions that we know about: an increase in our transportation budget for a known contract increase. We have a contract with our vendors for next year, and we know some of those rates are going to increase. And an increase to adjust tuition by 4.69% per memo we got from the state Occupational Services Division, which recommended that would be the average increase we'll see next year in out-of-district tuitions. For capital outlay, right now reserving all FY25 capital outlay money for the Heathbrook renovation project. We're in the design phase right now. We'll be going out to bid shortly, and then we'll know more in a more concrete fashion what those costs are going to be. But right now, planning on any other capital improvements until we know what that project's going to cost. It's much needed. It's a good, I think it's a good test for us to see if we can move away from some of the older HVAC systems we have in our schools on maybe a bigger scale down the road. So our salary represents 70.5% of our school budget, and it's broken out on this slide in the following into groups of labor categories. Teachers are obviously the highest with the most employees, and the 68% of that 70% salary. That makes sense. That's where the product that we deliver is delivered to students. So that's where we want to be spending our money. Most of the other groups are spread out pretty evenly amongst the remaining money. On the operating side, which represents 28.1% of the budget, transportation and tuition represent the bulk of that. The special education services and utilities are the next highest categories we see in spending on the operating end. Capital outlay is 1.5% of our budget, and as I said, we're prioritizing that 5-classroom Heathbrook renovation. If there are other funds become available, electrical assessment at the Heathbrook to be able to add some power to that building. Plan for a Heathbrook playground update. We're working on with the school PAC principal and looking for something that's more age appropriate, as we did with the Doing School recently. And the Doing intercom PA system is having some issues. It's beyond its useful life. It's an important feature that we want to make sure everyone's able to be reached when we need to. So that's a definite priority for the Doing School. Just listed some projects that we've completed or want to complete over the next several years. The HVAC, notably about 3/4 of the way down at the Wynn. HVAC for the classroom areas is currently contracted to be completed in the summer of 2024, partially using some of the last of that ESSER 3 money. So we're in talks with our contractor now. They're thinking we'll be in good shape to finish that project by the end of August. Capital, these are some capital projects we've completed in the past few years. You'll notice the 23-24 list is quite a bit shorter than other years. Kind of focused on the new school last year, punch list items at the center school, as well as just getting that school up and running. So kind of cut into some of the other buildings and what we're able to accomplish. I'm going to move on to grants and revolving accounts. We have 51 separate funds currently active that we manage in the business office. All of these have a specific use and purpose, and they have to be used directly related to the reason the funds were raised. We can't take parking fees and buy textbooks. If we collect parking fees, we have to spend it on something related to parking, either the parking lot or we help use those funds, for instance, to help support one of our security folks who patrols the parking lot. So it has to be related in some way. We have approximately 32 positions that are funded either partially or fully with grants and revolving accounts. This is just a listing of our revolving funds on the next page with the balance that we carried in FY24, 23, and 22, kind of a 3-year look back. And then I did sort of a quick summary on the source of the income and then the typical expenses that we would use for that fund. We don't generally use that for much of our operation, the revolving accounts, other than food services and circuit breaker, which I'll hit in a slide right coming up. Circuit breaker is a state reimbursement program, which is designed to provide financial assistance to school districts to offset the cost of delivering high-cost special education service to students. And I show a little example there. What we basically do at the end of each year is tally up the total cost on each student on a pretty sizable spreadsheet, submit that to the state, and get a total reimbursable cost for each student. In this example here, tuition's $125, speech services, OT, behavior, et cetera. Reimbursable expenses as well for $30,000. Transportation was just rolled in to this formula over the past 2 years to be included. So a total reimbursable cost for this student would be $170,000. The state sets a circuit breaker threshold each year, which changes. It's based on the cost to educate special education students on average across the state. So it's generally around between $45,000 and $50,000. To keep the math simple, I made it $50,000 in my example. So our gross claim in this case would be $120,000, and we would get back 75% of that in the next year. So that's kind of the way circuit breaker works. It's kind of a good news, bad news. When we have a lot of costs in year one, we get some of it back in year two. The 5-year history I show in the left side of the screen, sort of the balance that we carried forward in each of the past 5 fiscal years, and then what our net claim was. So you'll see our net claim has increased significantly from 2018 to 2023. Couple reasons for that. They rolled in a few services that weren't included. about 4 or 5 years ago, they included behavioral specialists in this formula. Up until that time, behavioral therapists were not able to be counted, but that added quite a bit to our reimbursement. And then, as I said, 2 to 3 years ago, they included transportation. That was phased in over a couple of years. So that kind of added to our reimbursement claim, as well as the numbers of students that are having services provided in that way. And on the far right side, sort of a history of this year, the spending we've had to this point, projected spending to the end of the year, and where our balance will be. And then projected for FY25 as well, what our claim will be and what students in private tuition schools will cost next year. I've tried to organize our tuitions that we need to report to the state and keep all the private school tuitions in the circuit breaker account, just for accounting ease for us. In food services is another one of our larger revolving accounts. Again, 5-year history, what our cash balance is with our just overall revenues, overall expenses. And this account, again, has also grown quite a bit in the past few years. The increase in participation due to the free universal free lunch and breakfast program is mostly the driver there. In fact, today, across the district, we fed 84% of the students, because it was a very popular popcorn chicken choice set. But 84% of the kids got lunch, so pretty good. Just found that out. So our food service program is completely self-sustaining. We don't fund that at all within our LEA budget, within that $1.3 million that we get extra from the town. None of that goes to food services. They sustain their own operation. Grant funding available. This is the grants we have for well, some go back to FY23. We're allowed to roll over grants for 2 years. So we still have some funding left in the FY23 grants, as you can see. FY24 grants we're in the middle of, and we don't really know what our FY25 allocations will be for the grants we get. The entitlement grants are shown here in blue. We know we'll get some amount, but we're not sure exactly what it will be yet. We did receive, down at the bottom of the page, you'll notice in red, a warning. We received a warning last week from DESE that our Title I funding would be reduced by approximately $183,000 for FY25. And that's based on the child poverty level from FY22. So when those numbers get calibrated, I think the threshold is 15%, and we generally hover right around that number. Sometimes we're over, sometimes we're under. And if we go under the 15%, we lose a section of the grant that, in this case, will amount to, they're telling us, $183,000. So the Title I program will have to be re-examined and sort of restructured. We met on that today as well, and I think we have a plan going forward to keep supporting those needs across the district as well. So this is what our final budget request will look like across the board currently, if we went to town meeting today, which we're not. So, but there'll be changes between now and then, I'm sure, as we find new resources or find new needs present themselves across the district. So next steps in our budget will be continued discussions with all of our school community. And then as needs or resources change, we'll be refining our budget. And this process will continue from now until May and continues throughout the year. The budget is never done. I like to say that I used to think we had a finished product at some point, but I don't think the budget's ever done, sadly. And, so that this slide just sort of represents some movement within areas of our budget. You know, there could be some movement from our salary to our operating accounts or vice versa. On our website, at the site shown there in our business office at the Tewksbury Public Schools website, I have a more detailed look at the numbers in a couple of different ways. We have a summary by the cost center, which sort of, cost center is a school or a department within the district. And I've summarized where we are right now with a salary subtotal and an operating subtotal for each of those areas. And then a more detailed look with each of those accounts broken out. So those are available on our school website, as well as a summary by DESI function code, which is sort of a nice way to group things together. Like if you want to know how much we're spending on all of our teachers, there's a number there. Aides, there's a number there because of the DESI codes that are used to report our spending at the end of the year. They're universal, they're the same across the state. And there's also a key there to explain what each of those codes means in depth, in a little more depth than just, you know, teachers or professional development or exactly what could go into each and every one of those categories. I used to bring those more detailed reports to this meeting and found that it was getting a little sleepy time for most of the people watching. So I just have those on the website if people are interested in taking a look at that. So that's pretty much my presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
Happy to answer any questions you have.
It's totally your call if you'd rather join us at the table, if you don't feel like you need to flip through your things any longer. But just to remind the committee and anybody else who's following along, this is Mr. Libby's first presentation of the fiscal year 25 budget. So we'll hear this 2 additional times before it goes to town meeting. So this is just a preliminary. If anybody has any questions, by all means.
I have one. Where does the information for the Title I come from? Is that census related? That would pull that in? Yeah, okay. That's it for right now. I have some digesting to do.
Feel free,
but,
yeah, keep thinking. Mr. Russo?
Yeah, I have a few questions, actually. And I'm going to take the liberty, I suppose, where we'll meet and have this presented 2 more times during a full school committee meeting. I'll take the time now to ask the bulk of my questions anyway. So I guess just a few things here. So when you talk about ESSER funding, and we've been talking a lot about ESSER funding now for 3 years, really, right, related to COVID. We know that money, those grants are ending later this fall. Approximately, how many positions does that really translate into, maybe in terms of FTEs, that we will either have to absorb into our budget or that essentially we will not be able to absorb into our budget? Like, what's that breakdown today?
So the six principal support positions.
Okay, so that's all related to ESSER.
Yeah, those are through ESSER.
Okay.
Are being eliminated The, currently,
Okay.
and there's 5 positions being absorbed into the budget.
Okay.
That's the 3 adjustment counselors, a nurse, and a ESL teacher.
In your opinion, your professional opinion, that will allow us to continue to support students for their social emotional needs and all the things that we are hearing about today in today's world, if you will. Okay.
Yeah, the educators are telling us they're very important.
Yeah.
I just want to make note, and I'm proud of this process because we've been putting those positions into our general budget
Yep.
over the last 2 years. So we weren't looking at 12
cuts.
support,
Yeah.
excluding the ones that are being eliminated, all of those. So we've been trying to put them back just so that it would not look as much of a hit to the general budget, putting them all in at once.
Okay.
So it's good planning by Mr. Libby, and thank him.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay. I just, a couple housekeeping. So like when we say, tech contracts are doubling for next year, but we're also seeing just a similar decrease in supplies and textbooks.
Yeah.
Is that, what's
I think that was more of a sort of an accounting
Okay.
piece
All right.
when I was reviewing with the tech budget with Mr. Stamp.
Yeah.
We've kind of recategorized a few of those items from our supplies into our tech area. So that, you see the numbers are pretty close.
Yeah, they are, yeah. And I didn't know if there was something offsetting that. And then the other couple questions I have are more tied to things around potential revolving accounts, fees, et cetera. When we think about our busing and our transportation costs and the fact that they're, drastically increasing in sort of comparison, again, obviously, when you look at a level funded budget, those have to be absorbed some way, those increases, right? So are there things that we should be considering when we think about charging for buses to our parents and families, or even better, charging for not having your kids take the bus and dropping them off? Have we given any thought to that? And again, I'm not suggesting it's something that we want to potentially put into effect for FY25, but as we start to think about just costs in general rising and the fact that we don't have collective bargaining agreements and we don't know where those are going to lie. Right now, 3% is what's budgeted, but based on information that's already out there, we don't know where those will fall. So how can we consider absorbing some of those? And I think about things like parking fees, athletic club fees. Right now, those are capped. Are there any things that we should be thinking about or considering to offset some of those high costs?
We did think hard about a small bus fee last year, more so to identify who the riders were.
Yeah.
When we're developing the routes and kind of figuring out how many buses we need. When we did the math, we were talking about, a $50 bus fee or things like that. With the ridership, we have currently about 2,000 students ride buses in town.
Yeah.
A smaller fee like that didn't feel like it was, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
So if we have 2,000 students that we bus out of 3,200 students, and I don't know, what, 300, 400 roughly are at the high school that drive themselves,
Yeah.
that means 900 parents drive their kids. We're paying for that busing, is what I guess I'm getting at. Just something to think about, that's all.
Can I just also just add on to the operating cost piece? And I know Mr. Libby talked about this at the very beginning. When we have to look at prioritizing
Yeah.
where we spend a fixed amount, and I think that that's important to say, the total is a fixed amount, and where that wiggles in between.
Yep.
When we have to look at where we prioritize that will be aligned to our district goals.
Yep.
So priorities will be aligned to what we say are the most priority pieces in the district. There's just not a lot of wiggle room there, so
Right.
efficiency of those services is really important as well.
Right, so I guess what I'm getting to is, if we're contracting 23 buses a year for 3,200 students, but only 2,000 only 2,000 kids are taking the bus approximately, right? Do we really need 23 buses? Is there a way,
again.
Right, and
if we
again,
have-
obviously,
yeah.
we want to make sure we have accessibility to education, of course, that's key, paramount. Again, it's just something.
And it can be looked at at different grade bands, and that's something that if we have to look at, we certainly will keep an open mind on that.
Okay, and then, so I'm a little perplexed, and Mr. Libby, I appreciate the detail around food service budget. And I know that we're fully funding that group. The fact that we have $1.5 million in that account today, I guess, troubles me a little bit, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, because yes, free and reduced lunch, yes, meals are included now for students, both breakfast and lunch. But the fact that has raised so drastically over the last 3-4 years, either we should be doing something with those funds to either enhance the meal plans here. And again, I know that we're following USDA guidelines, et cetera. I know Deb Mugford does a great job with that. But, there's also sort of some flack that I hear on the other side about, why don't we have a salad bar here? Why don't we have certain other options available for students, especially if we have the funds? Again, where we're tied to using that for that. So again, just something to, not necessarily a question, but just something to consider there. And then 2 more things. One, when I think about capacity at each school, so if we have 3,200 students in our district, and roughly our schools, if my math serves me right, just based on what I know about each individual school, if our schools can house roughly 4,400 students, approximately, should we be looking at, not for next year, but just, thinking ahead, some consolidation of sorts? We have a school, a new center school that houses 750 kids approximately, and we're just about at capacity. We have a high school that fits approximately, 1,100, maybe 1,200 kids, and we only have 700 kids in there right now, or a little over 700. So just trying to think about, again, because the rhetoric that is out there right now and the things that we're seeing in this climate, it's not sustainable long-term. So how can we, as a district, be creative to think about ways to potentially reduce things in other areas? I guess is what I'm getting to. And then lastly is when we think about, and you shared a nice slide with us about salaries for the whole department budget, roughly being about 70% of the total school budget, which obviously is it's very personnel driven. Excuse me. When I think about, and if you'll just sort of indulge me here for a minute, if I think about already a 3% raise baked into this for just next year alone, for every percent that's higher than that, for every 1% that's higher than that, that's approximately about $385,000 more on top of that we have to find someplace else, because we're not going to raise that number. We have to find it someplace else. So that's for 1%. So if I strip out the part-time piece for a second and have 469 FTEs, and I take my 385,000 and divide it and get an average salary across the district for everything, teachers, administration, nurses, secretaries, et cetera, that's roughly $80,000 a year for a salary. So if we have to go and raise salaries by an extra percent for every percent, that's approximately 4 to 5 resources that we're now having to find someplace else. And with 70.5% of our budget tied to salaries, we're not going to be cutting anything operationally, I would think. It's going to be very difficult to do that without cutting out services that support our goals. So how do we, have you given thought to how this would work if we have to do that and potentially have to go above a 3% threshold in certain areas? Loaded question, I know.
We've had discussions, yes.
Okay.
We're preparing for, multiple possibilities within this negotiation.
Okay.
Worst case, best case.
So when I think about today for K through 8, because high school is, I'm going to carve that out for a second, because high school, they don't have dedicated homerooms, and their classes vary from, 5, 6 kids to 30 kids. The K through 8 level, our average, we have 117 classrooms, K through 8, not general education classes, which, include special ed. Out of K through 8, we have 2,495 students. Divided by 117 classrooms is 21.3 students per classroom. So for every 1% that we go above salaries, that's 4 to 5 potential resources somewhere. Not saying for teachers, not saying for secretary, it's just somewhere. So that's raising our classroom size, though, by approximately half a student for every 1%, potentially. If you just kind of, trace the numbers out from what our average classroom size is today to what it looks like potentially, and that's just for 1 year, right? We're obviously negotiating for 3 years with all of our bargaining units, of course. Anyway, obviously there's more to come here, and obviously I know you're still playing with numbers and trying to figure out, where we can sort of look to see if there's any potential room to wiggle. Obviously things are fluid and changing, and obviously contract negotiations are ongoing at this point, so we'll see where all that lies, of course. But just something to put out there, I guess,
Yeah,
at this point.
those are close to the numbers I'm
Yeah.
working with too. So,
Okay. All right. That's all I got, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Russo, and welcome. Thank you. Mr. Parsons, any comments?
No, that was the best budget presentation I've seen. It was very well communicated, especially the circuit breaker. And Mr. Russo's questions and concerns echo similar to mine. I will say I can only imagine the difficult conversations and making a budget that is as personnel friendly as this.
Yeah.
I just want to recognize that very clearly. And again, I'm sure it was not easy to arrive at these budget numbers, especially that 3% cost of living. Other than that, instead of popcorn chicken, like, can we upgrade to steak tips? Would that get that number over 90?
Yes.
I appreciate that comment, Mr. Parsons. We have a principal in the audience tonight, and she actually, today, it is still afternoon maybe, the principals have worked diligently with us at central office to really look at the budget carefully and where we can shave down every place possible so that we're coming to you with, those thoughts and ideas. And those aren't easy conversations. And the principals have been really dedicated to working with us in this, total budget dollar number that we're looking at.
And I'll give you a moment, Mrs. Anderson, if you want to digest it, or did you have something you want to add now?
No, I'm good right now. Apologize for my tardiness.
Oh, that's okay. A couple of things I just wanted to add to the committee. Mrs. Biagioni Smith and I did attend Mr. Montori's budget presentation to the select board the other night. And if any of my colleagues, if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's totally worth watching. There's a lot of specific line items that he addresses that are very specific to our budget. Something to draw your attention to is his 5-year long-range plan. I think, and again, I want to give credit to the school principals, the district leadership team that has kind of helped, at least at the district level, keep us on a good path and where we need to go. Working with you, Mr. Libby, this is an awesome presentation. I appreciate it. And then also, we have a former school committee chair in the audience as well. As I have to say, I think the school committee has worked really hard to help us be in the good position that we are in now, clearly facing some challenges as we lose some of this valued ESSER money. Those are some good years.
During difficult times.
Yeah, during very difficult times, but that money helped.
Sure did.
Yeah, Mr. Libby, the ESSER 3 specifically, do you have plans for that, or is there any ESSER 3 dollars that could be used at that Heathbrook playground level?
No, it's,
No, it's all
yeah,
accounted for.
the HVAC projects came in well over
Yeah.
the amount we had anticipated. 3 years ago when we
Sure.
wrote the grant.
And then you also mentioned classrooms at the Wynn, but would that HVAC also cover hallways, offices, gym, cafeteria,
No, it's just the classroom wings.
just classroom
Yep,
space?
that's where our focus was. We wanted to try to maximize the use of those funds in spaces where students spend the most of their time, the bulk of their time.
Oh, understood. That's kind of a bummer, but yeah. A couple other things I just made note of as we're talking. The Title I, as Ms. B. Jones Smith mentioned, is that just specific to schools? Like, don't they break that down by schools, or, so that change in revenue for next year, is that district-wide, or would that just be for schools that currently receive Title I?
So when they allocate the funds, they tell us which schools are eligible. So some schools are just not eligible year to year. That can change based on property levels in the schools. So it is the overall
That's the overall.
budget, and then depending upon where we can allocate the funds.
Which we don't know at this point, which schools.
No.
Okay,
For the upcoming.
Yeah, we find that out in July.
Yeah, usually July.
okay.
Which schools are eligible, and I think there's some spending we can do district-wide, right? No? I mean,
A little,
Yeah.
a little, but we do it, there's lots of nuances in it, but we wrote a targeted assistance program, so it really is geared toward the students in those schools.
Okay. The circuit breaker, you mentioned that they're now covering for behavioral health. Well, do they also cover for social workers?
It's direct services to students, so I'm not sure if that would apply. It needs to be in an educational plan, and we have to be able to produce, an exact cost. So most of those services, we can put a cost to it. We get a bill, we get an invoice. So it's easy, because those do get checked by the state. They do spot checks on those. So we need to make sure that we're claiming the eligible expenses.
Okay.
And I don't think,
It would really be titled, it would be called counseling services, and we have multiple positions that can provide counseling services, so I'm not sure it's title specific as in who's providing, it's if a student has counseling.
In their
So
grade
whether it's, yes, it's SAC or a school adjustment counselor or a social worker.
And then my last thought, similar to kind of where Mr. Russo was headed, was in terms of just sources of revenue. I think that, we've had some tough years between COVID, lots of different transitions with, administrative staff that's changed over, things like that. But I'm wondering, do you think the district could be in a place now to take on maybe some creative ideas in terms of thinking that maybe, I don't know if it's going to bring in a lot of money, but I think it would provide a service to the community to look at, whether it be more preschool services. Certainly while, the Department of Education is looking at, at least the way it looks to me, down the road, bringing all districts up to speed where, it'll be available through your public school to have preschool. Is that something that Tewksbury could get ahead of that a little bit and maybe capture some revenue, and as well as kind of being ahead of the curve in terms of establishing that programming?
Absolutely. I mean, preschool would rise to one of the tops of the list of thinking that we're doing, and how, once we settle,
Yeah.
and get settled and know what space we have, what can we put in those classrooms or a space available to, generate revenue will be next on the list. The PK topic is hot. In fact, we have parents getting ready to register, and more parents want that service than we have room for right now. So, it's a balance too. Will we generate enough revenue where it pays for itself, or will we be putting ourselves just in providing it? So, again, we're open-minded to always to raise more funds and spend the money we have appropriately.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm just thinking more, providing services to the town
Yeah.
where people are in need, utilizing the space that we clearly have.
Right.
And just kind of maybe being ahead of the curve with where the state's going to push us anyway, maybe. That's all I have for today. I mean, again, we have a couple more cracks at this, so we appreciate this. And thank you for all your time, Mr. Libby, putting into this.
Of course.
The collaboration you have with the superintendent, and then also with Mr. Montori on it, so I appreciate it. Any other final comments from anybody? Okay. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session, which would be a collective bargaining conversation pertaining to the TTA teachers and ESP aides bargaining units.
I'll make that motion.
And a second.
Motion by Mr. Russo, second by Mrs. Biagioni Smith. Mrs. Anderson, how do you vote? Aye. And Mr. Parsons?
Aye.
Mr. Russo?
Aye.
Mrs. Biagioni Smith? Aye. The chair votes aye as well for unanimous vote to enter into executive session. We will not be re-entering in open session. We would just be adjourning from executive session at that point. So, thank you.